Surviving the Applewhites, Chapter 29. The day of the opening was going to go down in her personal history as the longest, most exhausting, most difficult day of her entire life, Edie thought. Maybe someday she'd write about it. That morning there had been costumes that still needed hemming, stage lights that needed refocusing. The meadow where the actors had been parking ever since they started rehearsing at Wits End needed to be mowed and signs put up to let the audience know it was the parking lot. Hal and Cordelia hadn't finished painting the set. The phone kept ringing with questions and ticket orders. Besides fixing the regular meals, Govindaswamy had decided to bake cookies and make punch to sell at intermission, so he needed more help than usual. A number of cast members took the day off work, and the high school kids on the tech crew skipped school to come help. Edie's friend Melissa skipped school too and came to do whatever she could. Edie didn't have any time to spend with her, though. She had rushed from one task to another all day, trying to keep track of everything and everybody. Her father was the only one who wasn't worried about the weather. He claimed that the theater gods were on their side and that the clouds that kept darkening the sky and threatening storms would blow over before the audience was due to arrive. And always, everywhere, Marcia Manning and the television crew were in the way, aiming cameras and shoving microphones in people's faces and tripping people with their electrical cables. Somehow, though, by the time cars started arriving and Jeremy was sent out to direct them to parking places, almost everything was ready. Even the problem of Destiny's ears had been solved. Lucille had made him a hat, which he wore in every scene, even when he was dressed in pajamas. A line had been added about Hans loving hats. No one had remembered to give Edie a count of the opening night tickets that had been given away, so more people were showing up than there were seats. Extra folding chairs had to be squeezed in, and family members of the cast were sent up to the loft with the sound and lighting technicians. As curtain time approached, Edie looked out at the barn full of people from the stage manager's station off stage left and realized that through all the rehearsals and barn renovation, she had never quite believed it would happen, that there would really be a Wits End playhouse that real live people would want to come to. Yet there they were, 177 of them, Jake's grandfather next to Marcia Manning and the producer in the front row, and 3 cameramen stationed in the aisles. She took a deep breath and gave the signal for the house lights to go down. Jeremy Bernstein began to play the overture on his accordion, mic'd so that speakers could carry the music to the farthest corners of the barn. During the overture, the nuns had come past Edie one at a time so she could light their candles. Randolph had decided to begin the show with a candlelight procession, the candles the nuns carried as they chanted their way around the stage, providing the only light. That way, they didn't need to build a separate set for the Abbey chapel. Edie's hand shook as she held the lighter to the wick of one candle after another. This must be what stage fright feels like, she thought. Her stomach was tied in knots. She didn't think stage managers were supposed to get stage fright. The overture ended and the note was given for the chant to begin. Dixit Dominus Domino meo. The soloist sang as she stepped out onto the stage with her candle, and the show began. There were 13 scenes in the first act. By the time the 5th scene, where Maria taught the Von Trapp children to sing Do Re Mi, was over, Edie's stage fright had disappeared. None of the awful things she had imagined, none of the glitches from dress rehearsal had happened so far. The actors had all remembered their lines and the words to their songs. Jeremy was playing the right songs at the right time. The lights were coming up and going down when she gave the cue. All the children were doing exactly what they were supposed to do, even Destiny, and the audience was applauding when they were supposed to. Maybe her father was right. Maybe the theater gods were on their side. And so it seemed right through the rest of the first act. Through intermission, The audience talked and laughed and seemed to be enjoying themselves, and Govinda Swami sold out all his cookies and punch, and on into the second act, until the next to the last scene at the Carlsberg Festival concert. The scene began with Captain Von Trapp playing the guitar and singing the Edelweiss song with Maria and the 7 Von Trapp children gathered around him. Distant thunder began to make itself heard beneath the music. Then, during the last 2 lines of the song, rain began to patter on the barn roof. As the song ended and the audience began to applaud, the sound of the rain on the roof grew in intensity. When the actor came on to announce that the Nazi escort had arrived to take Captain Von Trapp to his command in the German Navy, rain dripped off his nose as he began to speak. Throughout his speech the rain drummed harder and he spoke louder until by the end he was shouting at the top of his lungs to be heard, introducing the Von Trapp's encore song. Thunder drowned out the first notes of the accordion. Captain Von Trapp, Maria, and the 7 children lined up to sing, all of them looking intently toward where Jeremy was playing the introduction to the song. Edie couldn't hear the music of the pouring of the rain, and it was clear that none of the actors could either. Bring the musician's sound up, Edie whispered into her microphone to the sound technician. The actors can't hear. She had to strain to make out the reply through her headphones. I did already. It's up full. The actors were standing on stage now in position, their hands clasped in front of them as they should be. But they didn't begin to sing. 9 pairs of eyes focused desperately on Jeremy, who was clearly playing music that could not be heard. Thunder crashed again. Suddenly, the actor who had announced the song appeared on stage again holding a large microphone. He spoke directly into it, and the sound rose just slightly above the level of the rain on the roof. Ladies and gentlemen, the Carlsberg Festival concert will continue in a moment when the storm passes over the mountains. In the meantime, let us all sing together the song the Von Trapps sang earlier. Do, re, mi. I'm sure you all know it. Please join us. He sang the first line loudly into the microphone, and the actors on stage joined him. Soon the whole audience was singing along, and Edie realized the great advantage of doing a show that almost everyone already knew. After 2 rousing repetitions of Do Re Mi, sung into and over the rain and thunder, the pounding on the roof began to slack off. As the song reached its conclusion the 3rd time around, Captain Von Trapp stepped forward and took the microphone from the other actor who had stayed on stage conducting the audience. He held up one hand for silence and began the last notes of the song, his voice going down, down, and down into a deep bass. Do, ti, la, so, fa, mi, re. He paused, looking out at the audience, and then signaled for the last do. The audience shouted, Do! And then leaped to their feet, cheering and stamping and applauding. Captain Von Trapp waited till they had all settled down and taken their seats again, and then waved to Jeremy to begin their encore song. Edie breathed a sigh of relief as the song went perfectly, each pair of children singing their farewell and leaving the stage until only Destiny was left standing between Maria and Captain Von Trapp. When he sang that the sun has gone to bed, with the rain still pattering gently overhead, the audience laughed. I'll say, someone called out. Destiny, undaunted, finished his line, said his goodbye, and exited. The applause when the song ended was as loud and as enthusiastic as before. The rest of the scene, as the Germans discovered that the Von Trapps had fled, went perfectly. Edie was just about to call for the stage lights to go out when outside there was a blue-white flash, so bright that it could be seen through every crack in the barn siding, followed instantly by what sounded like an explosion. The lights went out and Edie's earphones went dead. Can anybody hear me? Edie whispered into her microphone. Nothing. Even the tiny light over her prompt book had gone out, and it was pitch black backstage. Electricity's out, she said in a stage whisper. Set up for the final scene, and I'll think of something. Somebody tell Jeremy to keep playing until somebody comes to tell him to stop. She hoped he could play without being able to see the music. Edie went over the end of the show in her mind. Even with the lights, the final scene was fairly dark. It took place outdoors at night in the Abbey garden, with the Von Trapps hiding while the Nazis searched the Abbey to find them. When Jake's character Rolf came on stage, it was his flashlight that allowed him to see Captain Von Trapp and Maria. The lights were supposed to come up enough that the audience could see them before Rolf did. Then, when Rolf had already called out to his lieutenant, he had to see Liesel, again in the light from his flashlight, and decide not to turn the family over to the Nazis. Without any stage lights, the audience would be able to see whoever Jake, as Rolf, lit with his flashlight. But they wouldn't be able to see that it was Rolf holding the flashlight. They wouldn't understand that it was Rolf's love for Liesel that kept him from turning them all in, that led him to call out to his lieutenant that there was no one in the garden. Without some light on the stage, so that the audience could see the moment of suspense as Ralph decides what to do, the ending wouldn't make much sense. How could they get enough light on stage to make it work? Nuns! Nuns with candles! The scene was the Abbey, and the nuns were supposed to come on at the very end for the final song anyway. There could be as many nuns on stage as they needed. The actors who played the nuns in the first act would already be back in their habits, ready for the end of the show. All Edie needed to do was gather them up before the scene began and get their candles lit again. They could start in a semicircle around the Abbey garden, and their candles would almost certainly give enough light for the audience to know what was going on. The stage crew was busy setting up for the final scene, working in the light from Jake's flashlight. Jake! What are we going to do? We need all the nuns right away, with their candles. Quickly, she outlined her plan, and he grunted agreement. And get another candle or two for Jeremy so he can play the last song. She took the flashlight and kept it trained so that the crew could finish changing the scene while Jake went to tell the other actors what they needed to do. This time, as the nuns gathered and she lit their candles, her hand was perfectly steady. It would work. She knew it. Already she could see in her mind's eye the scene as Mother Abbess began singing the final reprise of Climb Every Mountain, the other nuns joining in and lighting the way for the Von Trapps to begin their climb over the Austrian Alps into Switzerland and freedom. She felt almost as excited as if she were helping the real family escape from the Nazis.